August 22nd, 1988, Saitama Prefecture, Japan. At roughly 3:20 p.m., 4-year-old Konomari leaves her home in Iruma City with the intention of visiting one of her friends from kindergarten. She would never make it there. By 6:23 p.m., with Mari having failed to return home, her parents started to panic and, knowing that something seemed off, immediately contacted the police to report that their young daughter had gone missing. Could Mari possibly have been in serious danger? A thought that surely the Kono family tried to avoid as best as possible. But the police, though officially treating the disappearance of Konomari that day as a missing person case, was already expecting the worst. There were little to no clues to go off of, but what followed was a massive search effort in collaboration between the local police force and residents of the area. For the following 4 weeks, day after day, late into the night, they would search the entire area surrounding the Kono family home. A total of 50,000 posters made their way to police, train, subway, and bus stations across Japan. Thousands of hours were spent interviewing those who last saw Mari after she left home that fateful Monday afternoon. And yet, Konomari remained mysteriously absent. Where could she possibly have been? The answer was tragically bleak. As her worried parents, feeling that something wasn't quite right, were on the phone with the police to report their young daughter's sudden disappearance, the 4-year-old Mari was about to draw her last couple of breaths, because her life was very soon about to be cut dramatically short at the hands of an unassuming 26-year-old Tokyo resident. And to make the events of that late summer evening even worse, they would also mark the beginning of a serial killer's murderous career, as over the following 10 months, that same man would claim the lives of 3 more young, innocent girls from the greater Tokyo area, instilling an unprecedented amount of fear and unease in parents living in and around the capital of Japan. Join me for today's video as we delve into the disturbing life and the murderous career of an individual who didn't stop at committing horrific acts of violence. One who, beyond showing a complete lack of empathy for both his victims and their families, also went so far as to torment and mock them during an already unimaginable time of suffering. In the process, creating one of the most infamous, one of the most chilling, and frankly one of the most disgusting series of murder cases that Japan has ever seen. This is the story of Miyazaki Tsutomu, the Otaku killer. The story of one of Japan's most notorious serial killers begins in Itsukaichi, a town in Tokyo's Nishitama district, on August 21st, 1962. That day, Miyazaki Katsumi and Rieko welcomed their first and only son, Tsutomu. Despite being born into a wealthy and respected family, his father owned the Shin Itsukaichi-sha, publisher of one of the major newspaper publications in the area, the Akigawa Shimbun. Miyazaki Tsutomu did not have an easy childhood. His father was said to have been way more interested in his work rather than spending time with his family. And his mother was pretty much the same, except for the fact that she tried to compensate for a lack of parenting by constantly spoiling and buying gifts for her son. Tsutomu never really got along with his 2 sisters either. The only healthy relationship inside his own family that Tsutomu ever had seems to have been with his grandfather, Shokichi. It was perhaps as a result of this lack of care and attention at home that many former elementary school classmates of Miyazaki Tsutomu described him as a quiet and shy kid who rarely spoke unless he was prompted to do so by the teacher, to which he would then always reply clearly and without hesitation. While he was said to have been incredibly quiet, he was also incredibly smart, with above-average grades and a talent for the English language especially, where he was always best in class. As a young boy at least, he wasn't completely incapable of making friends either. Former childhood playmates, their parents, and teachers all remembered Miyazaki Tsutomu as a shy, yet kind young boy who cared about his friends. But despite that, and despite Miyazaki seemingly never showcasing any noteworthy troublesome behavior at a young age, there might have been a lot of anger and frustration boiling up inside of him at the time. He was born prematurely, and as a result had a rare physical deformity in his hands that somewhat limited their movement. Just to get this out of the way now, often reported in Western media as being his hands, this picture was actually taken from a medical textbook on an entirely different disability, known as Marfan syndrome. All it takes is a quick look at a picture of the guy to realize that his hands were actually completely normal looking. At least at first glance. But as inconspicuous as Miyazaki's disability might have been, it also ended up having a big psychological impact on him from a very young age. When he was 5 years old, a classmate teased him for it. A traumatic experience for the young Tsutomu, as it turned out. Because from that moment on, he was said to have blamed every little misfortune in his life on his disability. It is now argued that this was instrumental in shaping Miyazaki Tsutomu into the cold-blooded killer that he would later become. And indeed, his life entered somewhat of a downward spiral during his high school years. It's really difficult to gauge what kind of a person Miyazaki was during his teenage years, as impressions of him from that time in his life seem to vary greatly. Some say he was exceptionally quiet, but also funny and surprisingly good at sports. Others said his quiet nature made him an easy target for bullying, and that generally he was seen by most other students as a creepy loner who was always quick to get angry at others, and preferred to distance himself from other people in order to retreat into a corner and draw monsters and robots into his notebooks, inspired by the manga, anime, and movies that he had been obsessed with since his early childhood. But whether Miyazaki Tsutomu was a funny, sporty guy or a creepy nerd at that point in his life, high school was undoubtedly a huge turning point for him. By his final year in high school, he had lost all interest in his studies. His grades started slipping, and finishing 40th out of 56 students in his class, his dream of attending Meiji University and becoming an English teacher was off the table. Instead, he went on to take a photo technician course at Tokyo Polytechnic University's junior college department in 1981, and following graduation in 1983 started a job at a printing company, a job that he would quit only 3 years later in 1986. It was from that point on that Miyazaki started spending more and more time in his room, sometimes for months on end, completely immersed not only in his drawing, but also in his fast-growing collection of videotapes, which included both his own recordings and those acquired through the numerous video clubs that he ended up joining over the years. In his room, Miyazaki became increasingly distanced from society. He had no real friends to speak of at that point. Even other members of the video clubs seemed to have hated his guts. And his relationship with his father, his mother, and his 2 sisters was, as always, shallow at best. His grandfather was the only link to society as a whole that Miyazaki Tsutomu had left. The only person that cared about him, and the only person that he himself cared about. But in May of 1988, Miyazaki Shokichi passed away, leaving Tsutomu lonelier than ever before. In hindsight, it's hard not to view this pivotal moment in the life of Miyazaki Tsutomu as the turning point. The spark that was needed to turn him from a socially awkward, yet harmless loner into a gruesome serial killer. Because only 3 months after his grandfather's passing, and 1 day after his own 26th birthday, Miyazaki Tsutomu would commit his first ever crime, with the aforementioned abduction and murder of 4-year-old Konomari on August 22, 1988. The extensive search for Mari would unfortunately turn out to be fruitless. There were a few witnesses who reportedly saw the girl following a man shortly before her disappearance. But still, no further clues ever turned up, and for the time being, no dead body either, giving Mari's parents hope that their young daughter, somehow, somewhere, might still be alive and well. After 4 weeks, search efforts slowed down and Mari's missing person file would lay dormant for the time being. Parents in the area, though, would remain on high alert after what happened in late August. And rightly so, because 2 weeks after the search for Mari had hit a dead end, her kidnapper and killer had already found his second victim, only a few kilometers away from where he committed his first crime. In the afternoon of October 3rd, 1988, Miyazaki was driving around Hano City when he spotted 7-year-old elementary school student Yoshizawa Masami on the side of the road. After convincing her to get in his car, he took her into a mountainous area near the close-by Nagori River, where he then committed an almost exact copy of his first murder, strangling Masami with his bare hands until she stopped breathing, just like he did exactly 6 weeks earlier. Miyazaki then left the body at the scene of the crime and escaped. The Yoshizawa family reported their daughter as missing that same night, and a massive search effort followed that, again, brought forward no real clues or traces of the young victim. But the local police did immediately realize that the cases of Konomari and Yoshizawa Masami had to be connected somehow. After all, both cases took place on a Monday afternoon. Both victims were about the same age, and their homes were merely 13 kilometers apart from each other as well. Surely, this was no coincidence. But a lack of clues again forced the police to file a case of Yoshizawa Masami as a missing person case. However, the police would have to wait only 10 more weeks for yet another similar crime to occur in the surrounding area. A crime that would finally shed some light and offer some clues on the disappearances of Mari and Masami as well, confirming without a doubt what some investigators had expected for months at that point, that there was indeed a serial killer on the loose. December 9th, 1988. It was around 4:30 p.m. that day that 4-year-old Namba Erika became Miyazaki Tsutomu's third victim in less than 4 months, when she was kidnapped only 20 meters away from her parents' home in Kawagoe. Erika was crying profusely as Miyazaki pulled into the parking lot of the Nagori Youth Center, where she was then forced to remove her clothes in the backseat as her kidnapper photographed her. And only a few minutes later, she was dead. Miyazaki immediately got rid of his victim's clothes in the woods nearby, tied her hands and feet behind her back, wrapped her into a blanket, and put her in the trunk of his car. He was then on his way to dispose of the body, but this time he would just barely get away with it. Just around the corner from the crime scene, he got his car stuck in a roadside drainage ditch, and in a desperate attempt to conceal the evidence, he hid Erika's body in the surrounding woods. But as he returned to his vehicle, the blanket still in his hand, he spotted 2 men standing near his car. Trying to stay as calm as possible, he put the blanket in his trunk and had the 2 men help him get his car unstuck before, without so much as a simple thank you, he drove away. Once again, Miyazaki Tsutomu seemed to have escaped yet another gruesome, unnecessary killing of a young girl. But as he left the crime scene, the Saitama Prefectural Office was swiftly assembling a specialized team and a dedicated center to find Namba Erika, Yoshizawa Masami, and Konomari. And this time, Miyazaki had unknowingly left behind significant clues that transformed these 3 missing person cases into a hunt for a serial killer. Erika's body was discovered the following day. Her clothing was found near the crime scene at Nagori Youth Center, and the 2 men who helped Miyazaki get his car unstuck the night before did the best they could to offer the police some additional clues when they were called in for questioning. They correctly identified the suspect's license plate as originating from Hachioji, a major clue for the police. When it came to identifying Miyazaki's vehicle, however, the 2 unfortunately and unintentionally put the police on a completely wrong trail. The killer drove a dark blue Nissan Langley, a gift from his mother by the way, which in the dark of night they mistook for a Toyota Corolla 2. This led to a pretty time-consuming and pretty pointless search of over 6,000 Corolla 2s in the area. The police at least now had a general idea of who or what they were looking for though. Given the extensive media coverage of the crimes, it would have been logical for Miyazaki to simply lie low to avoid attracting further attention. However, he decided to do the exact opposite, cruelly harassing and even mocking the parents of his victims while evading the law. And as it turned out, Miyazaki had actually been doing this since only a few days after the kidnapping and murder of his first victim. When Mari's mother expressed hope in the media that her daughter might still be alive and well, Miyazaki left a postcard at the Kono family's doorstep that read, "There are devils about." Something that the police initially waved off as being nothing but a childish prank by someone unrelated to the crime. Then, not even a week after the murder of Miyazaki's third victim Erika, the Namba family received a similar postcard containing a series of photocopied letters cut from magazines and newspapers that formed the following message: Erika, cold, cough, throat, rest, death. Unfortunately, Miyazaki wouldn't stop at sending cryptic postcards either, because in the early morning hours of February 6, 1989, Konomari's father Shigeo made an absolutely gut-wrenching discovery on his own doorstep. A cardboard box which contained ashes, dirt, charred bone fragments, and 10 baby teeth, along with photos of children's clothing and a piece of paper with 5 words on it. Mari, bones, cremated, investigate, proof. The teeth contained within this box were eventually confirmed without a doubt to have belonged to Konomari. The initial verdict by the Tokyo Medical and Dental University, however, concluded that the opposite was the truth, leading to a press conference announcing that the remains were in fact not those of Konomari. Miyazaki, upon seeing this, was furious and immediately went to work on writing yet another letter before the second verdict could even be made public. This letter was a bit different though. For one, it would be addressed to not only the Kono family, but also to the Asahi Shimbun, one of the largest newspapers in Japan. In addition, it contained a photograph of Konomari, was handwritten as opposed to being made up of photocopied kanji like the letters that came before it, and was also signed with a name, a pseudonym to be precise, Imada Yuko. This letter was basically nothing more than Miyazaki's attempt to throw the investigation into disarray. He gave false accounts of how the murder of Mari actually took place and claimed to be a woman, motivated to commit these murders due to her own inability to give birth. He also made it very clear that the box delivered to the Kono's doorstep did contain the remains of their daughter. Quote, "I put the cardboard box with Mari's remains in it in front of her home. I did everything, from the start of the Mari incident to the finish. I saw the police press conference where they said that the remains were not Mari's. On camera, her mother said the report gave her new hope that Mari might still be alive. I knew then that I had to write this confession so Mari's mother would not continue to hope in vain. I say again, the remains are Mari's." This information was confirmed 3 weeks later with the help of a second examination of the remains. Contained within the box were teeth that were an exact match with those of Konomari, along with almost an entire skeleton of a 4 to 5-year-old girl. Merely the hands and the feet were missing. On March 11th, 1989, Konomari was finally laid to rest. In an emotional speech at her funeral, Mari's father said, quote, "Her hands and feet didn't seem to be with the remains. When she gets to heaven, she won't be able to walk or eat. Please return the rest of her remains." Mari's funeral was supposed to provide the Kono family with at least some closure, but their nightmare continued as soon as they got back home that day. Yet another letter, titled Confession, was left at their house, one that cruelly described to the bereaved parents the changes that Miyazaki observed in Mari's body after ending her life. It's really difficult to put into words the sheer cruelty of these letters and their devastating impact. And understandably, they sparked a strong reaction among the Japanese public who were closely following the Miyazaki murders, and also prompted the police to up their investigation efforts even further. They were soon able to squeeze quite a bit of information out of both the handwritten letters and the cardboard box sent by the culprit. Investigators were able to determine that the photographs contained within the letters and the box were taken with a Mamiya 6x7 camera, then a popular camera among those working in a printing business. The box itself was a double-walled corrugated one, often used to ship camera lenses, and Miyazaki's earlier letters contained some clues as well. The photocopied kanji letters used here appear to have been copied with the help of an industrial-grade copier. Everything pointed in the right direction, because Miyazaki was helping out his father's newspaper business and did create all of these letters with the help of the company's equipment. But for some reason, the police seems to never have followed up on any of these leads, and Miyazaki remained on the loose, long enough to claim the life of his fourth and final victim a couple of months later. On June 6, 1989, more than half a year after the death of Namba Erika, Miyazaki Tsutomu took a trip to Tokyo's Ariake district, where in a park near the local tennis courts, he encountered the 5-year-old Nomoto Ayako. Ayako was there playing all alone. No parents, no friends around to protect her from what was about to happen. Unfortunately, she was exactly what Miyazaki was looking for that day. He began by approaching and taking photos of Ayako, and after having gained her trust, persuaded her to continue the photo session in his car parked just around the corner. After they got in the car, Ayako was then taken to a parking lot around 800 meters from where she met Miyazaki. And according to rumors, it was here that the young girl dared to bring up Miyazaki's biggest source of insecurity: his hands. In a fit of rage, Miyazaki immediately went through with what he very likely had planned in the first place. He put his bare hands around Ayako's throat until she stopped breathing, then taped her mouth shut and threw her into the trunk of his car. This time, Miyazaki actually brought the body to his own room, where he kept it for 2 days until it started to decompose. He then dismembered it, hid the torso behind a portable toilet near Lake Miyazawa Cemetery, and scattered the rest of the body in the wooded hills located just a few hundred meters away from his parents' home in which he resided. Ayako's hair, clothing, as well as the blood-soaked sheets and plastic bags used during the crime, he burnt. A torso was discovered around 5 days after the girl's disappearance, and was later confirmed to belong to Ayako. It's unclear if the police linked this murder to Miyazaki's previous crimes, as it was his first crime outside of Saitama Prefecture. But whether or not the police realized that Ayako was the victim of the same man that they had been looking for more than half a year at that point, Miyazaki's career as a serial killer was about to come to an end very soon. And actually, it would be a matter of minutes which separated him from claiming the life of a 5th victim, because on July 23, 1989, he struck again. But this time, he would be caught red-handed. That day, Miyazaki approached 2 sisters playing near a public washstand in Hachioji. After he managed to separate them, he took the younger sister to a nearby river and began photographing her, while the older sister, quick to realize that something seemed off about the guy, ran home and informed their father, who made his way to the river as fast as he could, knocking Miyazaki down but failing to restrain him. Miyazaki Tsutomu nearly escaped justice once more. But fortunately, the guy was stupid enough to return to his car, where he was then caught, arrested, brought to the local police station, and charged with forcing a minor to commit indecent acts. Soon, the people at the police station started to wonder, was this the guy? Could this guy possibly be the serial killer that they had been looking for more than half a year? That idea didn't take long to leak out to the media, and even before anything was made official by the police, TV stations across Japan started plastering Miyazaki Tsutomu's face all over the news, reporting that this was indeed the guy, the man who caused so much pain for the families of 4 innocent girls, the man who had parents in communities all over the greater Tokyo area worried for their children's safety for the past 11 months. And soon enough, he started to talk. He began by revealing the location of the remaining parts of Nomoto Ayako's body, along with those of Yoshizawa Masami, whose body, hidden in the mountains near Komine Pass, had yet to be discovered. With this information, the remains of all 4 victims were finally recovered, allowing them to be laid to rest and finally bringing an end to Miyazaki's cruel and heartless killing spree. Miyazaki's story, however, was far from over, because for the Japanese public, his arrest was only the beginning. The trial of Miyazaki Tsutomu, unfolding over the next several years, would captivate an entire nation, as chilling revelations about his crimes, his personal life, his upbringing and family circumstances gradually came to light, keeping the people of Japan on edge. One of the most notorious moments in the media coverage surrounding Miyazaki Tsutomu occurred when reporters discovered his family's home address and managed to enter his room, even before the police had arrived. Inside, they captured footage of a space crammed with stacks of magazines, expensive video equipment, and most notably, thousands of videotapes. 5,763 in total. This footage, depicting a room which looks exactly like the lair of a twisted, perverted serial killer, quickly made its way onto nearly every broadcast about Miyazaki following his arrest. Later reports from people who were at the Miyazaki home that day revealed that some elements of the room were rearranged to appear more sinister than they actually were at first glance. For instance, the few erotic magazines in Miyazaki's collection, primarily composed of manga magazines, were strategically placed on top of every pile to emphasize their presence. But make no mistake, while not immediately visible, Miyazaki's room contained some of the most horrifying evidence ever linked to what would later be known as the Little Girl murders. More than 95% of the 5,763 videotapes found in Miyazaki's room were harmless stuff. Monster movies, anime, things that many Japanese kids, adolescents, and young adults were obsessed with at the time. Basically nothing that would be worth mentioning if this wasn't the room of a deranged serial killer. However, around 200 tapes in Miyazaki's collection were deemed to be directly related to the murder cases. And some of them depicted Miyazaki Tsutomu performing indecent acts on his victims' bodies. On top of how absolutely disgusting this obviously is, I cannot even begin to imagine just how tough it must have been for the investigators, who had to sit through this stuff as well. Day after day, grabbing one video cassette after another off the stack, in fear of having to sit through yet another emotionally scarring tape that will forever remain burned into your mind. Just awful. During his numerous interrogations, Miyazaki was reported to have at times gone into disturbing detail about how he committed the murders. But perhaps even more chilling was his complete lack of remorse for anything he had done to the girls. At that point, Miyazaki Tsutomu had without a doubt become by far the most disgusted and by far the most loathed person in all of Japan. And not only that, but the details about his life, his upbringing, and his personality and character brought with them countless reactions and discussions about not only crime in Japan, but also about entertainment media and its potential negative influence on the population. The fact that Miyazaki's room was packed with manga and videotapes, most of them anime or horror related, was enough for some to claim that entertainment media was responsible for turning the guy into a serial killing monster. It sparked the kind of debate that seems to surface every few years in countries all over the world, where entertainment media is used as a convenient explanation for society's ills, while deeper issues like poor parenting and complex societal problems are pushed aside. When the Miyazaki murders triggered a similar debate in Japan, it was argued that otaku, the Japanese equivalent of what we might call nerds in the West, were unable to distinguish between reality and fiction due to their deep obsession with entertainment media. Because Miyazaki Tsutomu shared this obsession, he quickly became the unwelcome symbol of the entire otaku subculture in the eyes of the general public. And as a result, members of video clubs, anime and manga enthusiasts, or even people who simply resembled Miyazaki, innocent individuals with no connection to crime whatsoever, found themselves unfairly judged and in some cases even attacked by the general public, simply for enjoying their hobbies. By the way, the nickname Otaku Killer given to Miyazaki Tsutomu seems to be something primarily used in the Western world as far as I can tell. It's pretty damn attention-grabbing though, I gotta admit. While Japan was deeply embroiled in debates over the negative influence of entertainment media, the trial of Miyazaki Tsutomu was about to begin. One might assume that securing the punishment he deserved would be straightforward given the horrific nature of his crimes. However, while Miyazaki was unquestionably guilty, determining his sentence would actually prove to be a long and arduous process. First, finding a lawyer willing to represent someone like Miyazaki was a significant challenge. Even Miyazaki's own father refused to provide legal counsel for his son, believing that it would be unfair to the victims. And the search for representation only came to an end when Iwakura Keiji and Suzuki Junji agreed to take on the case. Suzuki in particular had a compelling reason for doing so as well. He was a staunch opponent of the death penalty, the most likely outcome for Miyazaki. His objective was basically to secure a life sentence instead, and the first step towards achieving this would be to obtain a psychiatric evaluation of Miyazaki Tsutomu. The defense argued that Miyazaki, due to various personality disorders, was incapable of distinguishing between right and wrong. A psychiatric evaluation was eventually granted by the court, which revealed that Miyazaki did indeed suffer from both a victim and inferiority complex, believed to have been triggered by his disability. These factors, in combination with heightened sexual desires and compulsive collecting habits, were thought to have played a significant role in driving him to commit the crimes. However, the evaluation also concluded that Miyazaki was fully responsible for his actions, with no mental illness that would suggest otherwise, despite the defense's efforts to influence the outcome of the evaluation, because some of Miyazaki's most outlandish statements came during this evaluation. At one point, Miyazaki claimed to have engaged in cannibalism, stating that he had eaten part of his late grandfather's remains, and later alleged during his guilty plea that he had done the same with some of the body of his fourth victim. However, both of these statements are highly questionable, as investigators found no evidence to support such claims. Given the fact that Miyazaki's defense team was attempting to portray him as legally insane to secure a more favorable verdict, these confessions should be taken not just with a grain, but a whole bag of salt. And frankly, I'd much prefer this wasn't the truth. Miyazaki's crimes were gruesome enough as is, really. Miyazaki also said that he was in some sort of dreamlike state while committing the murders, something that was very easily disproved by the detailed descriptions of the crimes that he gave to the police following his arrest, which clearly showed that he was in a clear enough state of mind to know what he was doing at the time. Now, there was actually a second evaluation done which leaned more towards what the defense team was looking for, but regardless, they never got the verdict that they wanted. Miyazaki's final questioning took place in July of 1997, the final hearings in October and December of that same year. The court described Miyazaki's actions as, quote, "a heinous crime of a magnitude unprecedented in the criminal history of Japan," and went on to point out both Miyazaki's complete lack of sympathy towards his victims and their families, as well as the enormous social impact of his crimes. On April 14, 1997, he was sentenced to death. A punishment that, due to the defense's multiple appeals, would be delayed all the way until June 17, 2008, when Miyazaki Tsutomu, close to 20 years after committing his first murder, was executed behind closed doors at the Tokyo detention house. And with that, one of the most infamous crime sagas in Japanese history had finally come to an end. The emotional damage caused by the little girl murders of 1988 and 1989, however, was irreparable. Not only did Miyazaki cause immense amounts of grief for the families of his 4 victims, he managed to tear his own family apart in the process as well. The harassment that befell the Miyazaki family in light of Tsutomu's arrest forced one of his 2 sisters to drop out of nursing school, while his other sister had to call off her engagement. His father Katsumi, after selling the family house in 1994 and paying the proceeds to the victims' families, ended his own life in shame by jumping off a bridge. The story of Miyazaki Tsutomu, beyond being deeply disturbing, raises unsettling questions. Was it his parents' emotional absence and the resulting distance from his family that ultimately led him down the path to becoming a cold-blooded killer? Was it his disability and the bullying he endured because of it? Or perhaps the tragic loss of his grandfather, the only person who ever truly cared for him? Or was it the combination of all these factors that shaped his fate? Whatever the case may be, the only positive part of this whole story is the fact that Miyazaki was caught before claiming a fifth, a sixth, or God knows how many more victims. But the greatest tragedy remains that 4 innocent young lives were cut short, robbing them of the chance to enjoy their childhood. There's surely a lot to think and talk about with this haunting murder case. So if you have any thoughts that you would like to share with us, then feel free to leave a comment down below. And don't forget to leave a like if you found this video to be informative. A special shoutout goes to all of you who help make these kinds of videos possible in the first place, like my loyal Patreon supporters listed here, including Bavivu, Javier Soravia, Capybara Chuck, Turam, Daniel Dees, RK0, White Gilden, Justin Down, Yoko the Space Whale, Steve Matsui, Cats and Soup, Chart B-Man, and Ben Harradine. And to everyone else who watched all the way until the end, thank you so much for watching. Sayonara.